Breaking Dawn by Stephanie Meyer. Chapter 5. Isle Esme. Houston? I asked, raising my eyebrows when we reached the gate in Seattle. Just a stop along the way, Edward assured me with a grin. Felt like I'd barely fallen asleep when he woke me. I was groggy as he pulled me through the terminals, struggling to remember how to open my eyes after every blink. It took me a few minutes to catch up with what was going on when we stopped at the international counter to check in for our next flight. Rio de Janeiro? I asked with slightly more trepidation. Another stop, he told me. The flight to South America was long but comfortable in the wide first-class seat, with Edward's arms cradled around me. I slept myself out and woke unusually alert as we circled towards the airport with the light of the sun slanting through the plane's windows. We didn't stay in the airport to connect with another flight as I had expected. Instead we took a taxi through the dark, teeming, living streets of Rio. Unable to understand a word of Edward's Portuguese instructions to the driver, I guessed that we were off to find a hotel before the next leg of our journey. A sharp twinge of something very close to stage fright twisted in the pit of my stomach as I considered that. The taxi continued through the swarming crowds until they thinned somewhat, and we appeared to be near the extreme western edge of the city, heading into the ocean. We stopped at the docks. Edward led the way through the long line of white yachts moored in the night-blanketed water. The boat he stopped at was smaller than the others, sleeker, obviously built for speed instead of space. Still luxurious, though, and more graceful than the rest. He leaped in lightly, despite the heavy bags he carried. He dropped these on the deck and turned to help me carefully over the edge. I watched in silence while he prepared the boat for departure, surprised at how skilled and comfortable he seemed, because he'd never mentioned an interest in boating before. But then again, he was good at just about everything. As we headed due east into the open ocean, I reviewed the basic geography in my head. As far as I could remember, there wasn't much east of Brazil until you got to Africa. But Edward sped forward while the lights of Rio faded and ultimately disappeared behind us. On his face was a familiar, exhilarated smile, the one produced by any form of speed. The boat plunged through the waves and I was showered with sea spray. Finally, the curiosity I suppressed so long got the best of me. "Are we going much further?" I asked. I wasn't liking to forget that I was human, but I wondered if he planned to live in this small craft for any length of time. About another half an hour. His eyes took in my hands, clenched in the seat, and he grinned. Oh well, I thought to myself, he was a vampire after all. Maybe we were going to Atlantis. 20 minutes later he called my name over the roar of the engine. "Bella, look there." He pointed straight ahead. I saw only blackness at first, and the moon's white trail across the water, but I searched the space where he pointed until I found a low black shape breaking into the sheen of moonlight on the waves. As I squinted into the darkness, the silhouette became more detailed. The shape grew into a squat, irregular triangle, with one side trailing longer than the other before sinking into the waves. We drew closer, and I could see the outline was feathery, swaying to the light breeze. Then my eyes refocused, and the pieces all made sense. A small island rose out of the water ahead of us, waving with palm fronds, a beach glowing pale in the light of the moon. "Where are we?" I murmured in a wonder, while he shifted course, heading round to the north end of the island. He heard me, despite the noise of the engine, and smiled a wide smile that gleamed in the moonlight. "This is Isle Esme." The boat slowed dramatically, drawing into precision with the position against the short dock constructed of wooden planks, bleached into whiteness by the moon. The engine cut off, and the silence was profound. There was nothing but the waves slapping lightly against the boat, and the rustle of the breeze in the palms. The air was warm, moist and fragrant, like the steam left behind after a hot shower. "Isle Esme?" My voice was low, but still sounded too loud as it broke into a quiet night. "A gift from Carlisle. Esme offered to explore it." "A gift? Who gives an island as a gift?" I frowned. I hadn't realised that Edward's extreme generosity was a learned behaviour. He placed the suitcases on the dock and then turned back, smiling his perfect smile as he reached for me. Instead of shaking my hand, he pulled me right up into his arms. I must wait for the threshold," I asked, breathless, as he swung lightly out the boat. He grinned. "I'm nothing if not thorough." Gripping the handles of both huge steamer trunks in one hand, cradling me in the other arm, he carried me up the dock and onto a pale sand pathway through the dark vegetation. For a short while it was pitch black into the jungle-like growth, then I could see a warm light ahead. It was about at the point when I realised the light was a house. The two bright perfect squares were wide windows framing a front door. That stage fright attacked again, more forcefully than before. Worse than I thought, we were headed for a hotel. My heart thudded audibly against my ribs, and my breath seemed to get stuck in my throat. I felt Edward's eyes on my face, but I refused to meet his gaze. I stared straight ahead, seeing nothing. He didn't ask what I was thinking, which was out of character for him. I guess that was meant, but he was just as nervous as I suddenly was. He set the suitcases on the deep porch to open the doors. They were unlocked. Edward looked down at me, waiting until I met his gaze before I stepped through the threshold. He carried me out through the house, both was very quiet, flipping on lights as he went. My vague impression of the house is that it was quite large for a tiny island, and oddly familiar. I'd gotten used to the pale-on-pale colour scheme preferred by the Cullens. It felt like home. I couldn't focus on any specifics though. The violent pulse beating behind my ears made everything a little blurry. Then Edward stopped and turned on the last light. The room was big and white, and the far wall was mostly glass, standard decor for my vampires. Outside the moon was bright on white sand, and just a few yards away from the house, glistening waves. But I barely noted that part. I was more focused on the absolutely huge white bed in the centre of the room, hung with billowy clouds of mosquito netting. Edward set me on my feet. I'll go get the luggage. The room was too warm, stuffier than a tropical night outside. A bead of sweat dewed up on the nape of my neck. I walked slowly forward until I could reach out and touch the foamy netting. For some reason I felt the need to make sure everything was real. I didn't hear Edward return. Suddenly his wintry finger caressed the back of my neck, wiping away the drop of perspiration. "It's a little hot in here," he said apologetically. "I thought that would be best." "Thorough," I murmured under my breath, and he chuckled. It was a nervous sound, rare for Edward. "I tried to think of everything that would make this easier," he admitted. I swallowed loudly, still facing away from him. Had there ever been a honeymoon like this before? I knew the answer to that. No, there had not. "I was wondering," Edward said slowly, "if first... maybe you ought to take a midnight swim with me." He took a deep breath and his voice was more at ease when he spoke again. "The water will be very warm. This is the kind of beach you would approve of." "Sounds nice." My voice broke. I shrieked like a human minute or two. It was a long journey. I nodded woodenly. I felt barely human. Maybe a few minutes alone would help. His lips brushed against my throat just below my ear. He chuckled once and his cool breath tickled my overheated skin. "Don't take too long, Mrs. Cullen." I jumped up a little at the sound of my new name. His lips brushed down my neck to the tip of my shoulder. "I'll wait for you in the water." He walked past me to the French door that opened right onto the beach sand. On the way he shrugged out of his shirt, dropping it on the floor, then slipped through the door into the moonlit night. The sultry, salty air swirled into the room behind him. Did my skin burst into flames? I had to look down to check. Nope, nothing was burning. At least not visibly. I reminded myself to breathe, and I stumbled towards the giant suitcase that Edward opened on top of a low white dresser. It must be mine, because my familiar bag of toiletries was right on the top. There was a lot of pink in there, but I didn't recognise even one article of clothing. As I poured through the neatly folded piles, looking for something familiar and comfortable, a pair of old sweats maybe, came to my attention that there was an awful lot of sheer lace and skimpy scattered in my hand. Lingerie. Very lingerie-ish lingerie, with French tags. I didn't know how or when, but someday Alice was going to pay for this. Giving up, I went to the bathroom and peeked out through the long windows that opened to the same beach as the French doors. I couldn't see him. I guessed he was there in the water, not bothering to come up for air. In the sky above, the moon was lopsided, almost full, and the sand was bright white under its shine. A small movement caught my eye, draped over a bend in one of the palm trees that fringed the beach. The rest of his clothes were swaying in the light breeze. A flush of heat flashed across my skin again. I took a couple of deep breaths and went into mirrors above the long stretch of counters. I looked exactly like I'd been sleeping on a plane all day. I found my brush and yanked it harshly through the snarls on the back of my neck until they were smoothed out and the bristles were full of hair. I brushed my teeth meticulously, twice. Then I washed my face and splashed water on the back of my neck, which was feeling feverish. That felt so good I washed my arms as well, finally deciding to just give up and take the shower. I knew it was ridiculous to shower before swimming, but I needed to calm down, and hot water was one reliable way to do that. Also, shaving my legs again seemed like a pretty good idea. When I was done, I grabbed a huge white towel off the counter and wrapped it under my arms. Then I was faced with a dilemma I hadn't considered. What was I supposed to put on? Not a swimsuit, obviously, but it seemed silly to put my clothes back on too. I didn't even want to think about the things Alice had packed for me. My breathing started to accelerate again, and my hands trembled so much for the calming effects of the shower. I started to feel dizzy, apparently a full-scale panic attack on the way.